Good evening, guys. Like Robert said, my name is Steve Weddle. I'm president of the Prairie Colors of Orange County, and he's asked me to come here and basically share my knowledge with you on coyote hunting. I'm primarily going to be focusing on shotgun hunting, which is most of what I do. And I'd like to kind of run it informally, so if you guys have any questions throughout the process, or I'm talking about something boring, don't throw food at me, just let me know, and we'll get going. So I like to compare shotgunning coyotes a lot with fly fishing. Has anybody done any fly fishing here? Okay, so when it happens right, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, everything comes together and it works on a level that is so much more than just hunting. It's really closer to archery with a gun than any other style of hunting. And when it goes badly, it's like fly fishing when it goes badly. It's a horrible mess and you go home and you think you never want to do this again. So hopefully we can dispel some of those mess and make it a little easier on you guys. Like I said, a lot of this is my own personal feelings. This is how I hunt. And there's some facts I've thrown in here to help you guys out. So we'll start off with coyote psychology. Best really to know kind of what we're going after. There's a couple things that really come into play with shotgunning coyotes that don't so much with rifles. A coyote being a canine is somewhat lazy by nature. I mean, if any of you have a dog, most of the day you'll see it lying around the house, and until you get really active and do something with it, that's pretty much what it does. Coyote's pretty much the same way. And when we're out there calling them, you're trying to elicit a prey-predator response with that call. So you're trying to get that coyote to come into you saying, hey, I'm ringing the dinner bell. Well, if you set yourself up in a situation to where the attributes of the animal are easily, let's say, accentuated, i.e., maybe you're calling on top of a hill and you've got a nice canyon behind you, well, your call is going to echo off those walls pretty good. That coyote's going to hear you a long way away. That's not necessarily to your benefit when you are shotgunning. If your rifle's set up and you're on top of a ridge, you've got a good clear view, say 300-400 yards. Most of the time, if there's a coyote within the area, no matter which direction you call, you can get it to come in 300 to 400 yards. It's kind of like their little safe zone. I really think, let's expand on that for a minute. My magic number is somewhere between 200 and 250 yards. If you can stand in the middle of a clear field and call on a coyote at 250 yards away if you don't move. That's kind of where all their alarms go off. That's where they get nervous. And what comes into play there primarily is their sense of smell. They can hear your call. And from all the research I've done, and personally, I think it's about half a mile away on average terrain is what they can hear. Like I said, if you're up against a canyon or something, or you get some echo, you may get a little bit farther than that. But for all intents and purposes, it's about half a mile. So when they come into you, if they're coming from half a mile away, they're pretty committed. They're working their way in. When they get to that 200-yard zone, they now either want to see that sound, where that sound's coming from, or they want to smell it. And they want to smell it more than they want to see it, because typically you're in a brushy terrain. They can't really see very well. They're 18 inches off the ground. So knowing that and kind of working that into it, they're going to go to the downwind side 99% of the time. If you see them coming in, like I say, and it's really kind of a neat thing to see this, they will literally stop at about 200 yards. They'll come in on a full run most of the time, and then they'll just kind of stop. And then you'll see them start working towards the downwind, and they'll go kind of in a slow fashion. And that's really the key time where all of this kind of comes together. That's your make it or break it point. You have to understand that animal's prey response and sort of play off it to get them to come in, and that's primarily what we're going to talk about. So there's a gentleman by the name of Ted Stotler. I don't know if anybody knows that name. He's a pretty involved coyote hunter. He's also a published author, school teacher. He lives out of Nevada. And I sort of subscribe to his theory of coyote encounters. And he summed it up into 4 different categories. You've got a single encounter, multiple encounter, a reluctant coyote, and what he likes to refer to as a NASCAR coyote, also known as the bat out of hell coyote. The single encounter and the multiple encounter, for all intents and reasons, you should treat every coyote as a multiple encounter. If you see a single coyote, assume that there are more coyotes and act appropriately. Maybe you can up your odds of taking a multiple in that. And typically what you have the most of is the reluctant coyote, what I just talked about. That 200-yard radius. They break that and they get reluctant, so they're working the wind on you. You need to be aware of that, your wind position, and things of that nature, so you can have a much more successful outing. Now the NASCAR coyote is a whole other breed. The NASCAR coyote is typically a coyote that's been shot at before. And what these animals will do, you'll probably have seen this before, is you'll be calling and you'll have a coyote run straight through your stand and never stop. And when they do that, they're trying to catch the wind of the sound. So when you're shotgunning, whether you're using electronic call or hand call, it doesn't really matter at that point. If you see a coyote coming in on a dead run towards your call, when it gets in range, shoot it. Don't assume that it's going to stop. Don't assume that you're going to have a broadside shot. If that thing is running full out, pull the trigger. You're not going to get a second chance in most cases. Those are probably, I would say, about 10% or so of the coyotes I shoot are like that. I tend to hunt public land most of the time. So a lot of these coyotes have been called before, especially the older animals. And so when you get into that situation, you just have to be in that mindset. If you have a shot, take the shot. The reluctant coyote, you can work with a little bit. If you're out there calling and you see this thing, you know, let's go back to 200 yards. So you see your coyote at 200 yards and he's moving in and out of the bushes. You want to keep calling and stay as still as you can until that coyote stops moving, wherever that magical number for that coyote is. And it's different for all. Some of them get comfortable coming all the way in. I've shot coyotes. I shot one a couple of years ago at 11 feet. So we'll get into that in a little bit. That's a whole other story. But for the most part, I'd say the average shot is probably about 20 to 25 yards. And you can get them into that range consistently if you work with them. So the most important thing to take out all of that, and when we're talking about the animal itself, is you remember the downwind theory. We'll call it downwind theory. That coyote is always going to go to downwind. Just assume that. And if it doesn't happen, great. If one comes in upwind of you, you're ahead of the game. So you want to position yourself, and we'll give it a little diagram here. Say if this is your stand, and the wind's blowing this way, ideally the sun should be somewhere over here, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. You want to position yourself on the downwind side. Now if you're using an electronic call, I like to call crosswind. And typically I like to call almost 3/4 wind. So I will put the call so the speaker is going this way, and I will position myself here, about 15 yards away, if possible. And you want to watch the downwind side. The coyote, wherever it comes in, is going to work this way, or he's going to work this way. And you'll see him, if you're watching the call out of the corner of your eye and looking downwind, you'll see that coyote come in, almost always. So we'll kind of segue that into what we need to bring out there. Let's talk about what's going on before the hunt really quick. So gear for shotgunning is pretty basic, just like it is with any kind of coyote hunting. You're going to need camo of some sort. Camo is not necessarily as important as people put precedence on it. It's important that you blend into your environment. If you have on earth tone clothing, I've shot coyotes in you know, a green shirt and brown pants before. The whole name of the game is to make yourself the most successful you can be. So all these little things kind of add up. Most of us use camo, I know I do. And it doesn't have to be, you know, name brand, special, mossy oak, whatever. It just has to be similar to the environment that you're in. You don't want to stand out. And it has to be of similar colors. You don't want to wear a high contrasting top to a high contrasting bottom. That'll set you aside anything else. So the two most visible colors are black and white because they're the most contrasting colors that are out there. So you really want to give your outline a breakup. And the most important thing with that is I always wear a face mask and gloves. The coyote's eyes are pretty sophisticated as far as animals go, and they're a lot more sophisticated than human eyes. They're really designed to pick up on motion. They can't see detail as well as most people give them credit for, but they can see motion better than any other animal I've seen out there. And if you don't have gloves on, and you, for instance, move your hand in front of your torso, and the rest of you is in camo, that motion is exceptionally easy to pick up. It's like shining a flashlight at it. You have a light-colored object against typically a dark-colored background. So it really helps. Absolutely, gloves and a face mask, I think, are mandatory. You're talking about calling the animals real close. Let's talk about cover scents and scents. I know a lot of guys, especially bow hunters, I went through this craze for a while to spray everything down with my scent away stuff, and I had to put the pine covered scent on my backpack and gear bag that I put under the tree. Those sprays help, but you absolutely cannot rely on them. The human scent, even down to things like cologne and toothpaste and deodorant, these things are not natural to a coyote. They have such a heightened sense over any other animal out there, being that they're a predator. Bobcats, I don't see too much going on with them, but really within the coyotes, they will focus on that. And that's the biggest thing that you need to be concerned with, is your scent and what you do with it. So you're never going to be able to kill your human scent. Just go into it knowing that and accept the fact. It is a good idea to do things to decrease your human scent. And I'll give you, for instance, you go out in the morning and you've got a coat on. Gets a little warm, you start sweating. If you take that coat off and you tie it around your waist or roll it up on your back, especially if you've exposed any of that sweat, you just increased your scent area, if you will, a multitude of times. So if you're going to do that, I mean, I know I do it all the time. Either toss it in a pack if you've got one, or toss it in the car, and you'll notice it's really the little things that sort of add up to being successful with this. The calls, like I said, I use both electronic and hand calls. They need to be used a little bit differently to get the most effect out of them. When you're shotgunning, your goal is to get that predator within your comfortable shooting distance, whatever that may be. That may be 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards, 50 yards. And if you're using a mouth call exclusively, it can be done, but it's a little more difficult. The coyote is looking now right at you. It's looking at the sound. So what you need to know about using a mouth call primarily is don't drop the call from your face. The biggest mistake I see when I take a lot of new guys out and teach them to hand call is that they'll call and then they'll drop the call and put their hand back at their side. And so when this happens, you're creating all this extra movement that coyote is now focused on. It's looking at you because you're making a sound. If you don't move at all, you can get them in shooting distance quite readily. But dropping that call is enough to spook a coyote. At several hundred yards, it's enough to spook a coyote. So ideally what you want to do is, if you're hand calling only, you don't want to move your body if at all possible. And the other thing I can say about that really quick is that if you see a coyote, don't care about the coyote that you don't see. Don't care about the coyote howling behind you or anywhere else. Focus on the animal that you can see and take the shot that you can take. Especially when you're talking about multiple animals. You have 3 coyotes come in. Don't think if I shoot the lead coyote, they're a mistake. Shoot the coyote that you have the best chance of hitting. Then worry about the other animals after you get the first one down. So when they're coming in and you've got this coyote in front of you and you're mouth calling, so you're like this, you want to stay ideally focused on that coyote. Now, you don't have to be calling all the time. You might be whimpering on your call. You may be not making any noise at all with your call. And if that coyote's coming in, trotting, running, even walking in, there's not necessarily a reason to make another noise. When you call, be it electronic or hand, and you really start cranking on the call, it seems unnatural to them most of the time. Their hearing is very sophisticated that the fact that they're used to hearing their normal prey animals all the time. So if you're not exactly on pitch, exactly on key, they're interested in you. You may sound like a dying rabbit or a squirrel or whatever you're trying to imitate. But don't worry so much about being exact. It's kind of like fishing. You can get them interested in a lure that looks somewhat similar to what their normal prey is, and they'll still come in. So if the coyote is moving, you don't need to keep calling. You can fire up the call a few times if you feel necessary. If you see the coyote deviate, you want to keep them coming to you. So now going back to the mouth call, you're standing there calling and you see this coyote come in. Now when I hunt, I almost exclusively stand up if at all possible. The reason I do that is twofold. I'm a lot faster on the swing with the shotgun standing up, and I see a lot more. Standing up gives you a whole other perspective over the top of bushes and grasses and everything else than you will sitting down. So typically what I do is I back into a tree and I have the gun at my side. I have a little, it's actually a motorcycle kickstand deal that I use, a little plastic deal about yay big. Sometimes I use a twig and a lot of guys use twigs. I'll actually rest the end of my choke tube on that. And the gun will sort of sit there. I always have control over it. It's, you know, we've got to be safe here. So keep that in mind. Don't just lay the gun against a tree. That's not okay. So you'll be calling like this, in my case. I've got the gun like this. And as soon as that coyote is in effective range, I drop the call and come up with the gun. And it takes a little bit of practice to do that, but it needs to be one fluid motion because you really only have about a second and a half. As soon as that coyote sees the movement, they're going to try to break for cover. They don't necessarily know what you are, but they know something is not right. And your typical coyote you have between a second and a second and a half. Now it doesn't sound very long, but believe it or not, it's too much time. A lot of guys will speed up too much and overshoot. And so the biggest key with that is just one fluid motion. Drop the call, get your support hand under your forearm, and get the gun up to your shoulder. Make a clean shot. It can be done certainly, and you can push the envelope with your range. I mean, when I started shotgunning coyotes, I wouldn't take a shot past 30, 40 yards. I didn't feel comfortable with it. The more that I got knowing my gun and how the specific ammos worked in my gun and my things, I readily shoot coyotes 50, 60, 70 yards. And they're clean kills. So really knowing your gun is key. So along that lines of gear, let's touch on electric calling really fast, or electronic calling, excuse me. So electronic calling, either alone or combination with hand calling, can be hugely effective to the shotgun hunter. You're placing the sound now away from you. So the animal is a lot more focused on that sound. Typically, they will go to the area of that sound, like I said, using the diagram, on the downwind side. And a lot of times what I like to do is call over the electronic call. Hand call, excuse me. And I do that because I think I get a little more range out of the hand call. I also I can do a manipulation of sounds. I can be playing a rabbit distress on the electronic call, and I can be doing pup distress on the hand call. Now typically I do that up until a point where I get a reaction from a coyote. I see a coyote, it's coming in. If I'm using the electronic call in that case, I almost exclusively always go to the electronic call. It's just so much easier to get that animal to get away from you, and it gives you a little bit of a level of manipulability where you can afford to make a few little mistakes that you don't know you're making and not spook that animal. If he's looking 20 feet to your left, he won't necessarily see you shift slightly in the bush. If they're looking right at you, it's a little bit more difficult. And that's pretty effective too. Now when using electronic call, I know Robert's passing around his lanyard. If you, whoever's got it, can you hold that up? Sure. Oh, I'm sorry. So Robert's Fox Pro is one of the older Star calls. Notice he's got a small screen on the LCD display. I use the TX100 remote, which has a huge screen. So this call, if you'll notice, is pretty non-reflective for the remote. It's kind of all matte black. It's got this little small screen on it. That little small screen, believe it or not, you could signal somebody at over 500 yards with it, if you catch the sun just right with it. So when I call, I always have this turned into me like this. So the screen is never visible, regardless of your remote. This is like a mirror shining out there. And your biggest friend on your remote is your mute button. Spend some time at home listening to your calls. Doesn't matter which one you're using really. There's no one great call other than the other. It's more so how you use it. So let's say you're using a rabbit in distress call. All the commercially available sound files that Fox Pro does or any of the other ones out there all have a sequence on them. They have sequences where they end, they're dubbed together, they come, they start again, they end again. If you know where those are and you know how to manipulate the mute button properly, you don't need any of the fancy programs that are out there that let you put your own call sequences together. Those are nice, but I find that they don't fit all the situations. I've done a couple files like that, especially when I first really got started in this, and I thought, man, this is the best thing in the universe. These call sequences are great. I can do a 15-minute call sequence. I can start with this call. I can come in with this call. Kind of really overthinking the whole thing. That mute button works far better. If you know, and it's really a pause button. I don't know why it's still called a mute button. It pauses and restarts right where it left off in case of Fox Pros. So typically I'll stand there with my remote around my chest, and I'll have my index finger on it just sitting like this. Same thing with a hand call. You want to keep kind of your movement inside your body. Don't give them anything that they can look at. You know, movements like out here, even shifting your legs against the backdrop are really key. So hitting that mute button, starting and stopping, is very effective. Especially if you have a Coyote hang up on you. You can give it a quick little chirp. But the key there is knowing where that call is in your sequence. It's just as easy to make that work for you well as it is to have it completely backfire on you. If you turn that back on when that jackrabbit starts wailing and that coyote is under 50 yards, for the most part they're going to turn around and run right the other way. It's been listening to this call and the sequence of this animal that it thinks it's dying, and now all of a sudden you're introducing a sound of an animal that's vibrant and very loud, and it's a jarring noise. And most of the time they'll book right out. So in that case, if you've gotten yourself into that situation where you've worked that call and you're on that section where it's either wailing or very loud, you can do one of two things. If you think that you really need to call, haven't seen that coyote in 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute, it's behind a bush somewhere, you can, if you know your remote well enough, work your volume down really low and turn it on. That works. I've done that before. The other thing you can do is try to lip squeak. I mean, we all know how to lip squeak in here. And quite often that's enough to get them peek out their head. May not get them coming into you, but they'll usually step out of the bush. It's a new and exciting sound. Or if you have one of these little squeakers, I use a squeaky out of a dog toy sometimes, have it in your pocket. You can hit that really quick. And again, be ready knowing when you've done that, that animal's most likely going to jump out, give you a shot, and then leave very quickly. You're introducing sort of another element to that. And that works really well. So, you know, just keep that in mind. If you're using the electronic calls or the hand calls, just make sure you practice a little bit, that you're familiar with that equipment before you take it out. You can be really successful with it. So let's talk about guns for a minute. A lot of the mistakes that I see new guys shotgunning, and I made the same mistakes, is really in the ammo to choke tube combination. It has a little bit to do with the realistic effective range of a weapon. You can kill a coyote with a 410. You can kill a coyote with a 20 gauge. They're not very realistic because they have a very short effective range. You might be lucky with a 410 load to get past 15 yards with enough pellets to really take down a coyote cleanly. Same thing with the 20 gauge. You might be lucky to get past 30 yards. And again, it's very dependable on what you're putting together, but it's a good rule of thumb. I recommend 12 gauge or larger. Some of the guys that I hunt with all the time use 10 gauge. I don't think that's necessary. A 12 gauge works really well. I use a 12 gauge exclusively. And I use 3.5. The main reason I use 3.5 is not what you might be thinking, that I need that extra stopping power. It equates to a longer effective range. So if you're using a 12 gauge 2 3/4 load, and we'll use number 4 buck for example. Number 4 buck in a 12 gauge 2 3/4 load, you're going to have somewhere around 30 plus pellets, probably about 30 to somewhere in there. And in a 3-inch, you might get that up to around 40. And again, very dependable upon the manufacturer of the ammunition. The Winchester Super Magnum 3.5, so I'm using now number 4 buck, I have 52 pellets. And that just gets my effective range out that much farther. So let's go over effective range really quick so you guys really kind of get what I'm talking about. This dry erase board is 36 by 24. And the gauge for judging shotgun ammo forever has been a 30-inch circle. What is a pattern within a 30-inch circle? I think that's actually more unrealistic on a Coyote. What you really want to know is what's your pattern in a 20-inch circle. And the reason you want to do this is if you imagine 3/4 of this board being your 30-inch circle, and you hit that with number 4 buck, and this circle here, which is probably about a 16-inch diameter, contains 80% of your pellets, and your pellets are out over here, that's really your kill zone. I had a gentleman ask me before the meeting about double-aught buck or triple-aught buck. I've used it, I will no longer use it. The amount of pellets that you get in it and your patterns far outweigh the stopping power of that individual pellet. I did some patterning loads very recently where I did a lot of tests on this. I used 3-inch triple-aught buck, 3-inch double-aught buck, 3-inch single buck, and in all of them, the worst being the triple-aught buck, on a 24-inch square, you could take a pie plate, which is about 10 inches in diameter, and always find a hole where it did fit, where there were no holes in that target. And I found really that number 4 buck is about your ideal shot for a Coyote. I've used other things. When I use non-lead, some of the heavy shot products and things that I have to use in the condor areas, they don't offer it in the number 4 buck nearly as often as they do in the T-shot. It's number 4 buck is almost a seasonal run for them. T-shot works pretty good. I don't know if any of you have the handout that I sent to Robert, but I included a shot chart on there. So if you're looking at shot sizes, T-shot isn't that much smaller. It's a 20 caliber versus a number 4 buck, which is a 24 caliber. On paper, it doesn't look that different. When you're talking about stopping power, there's a big difference. Now, non-lead sort of throws a wrench in the fact that it behaves totally different than lead ammunition. Heavy shot actually kills a little bit better than lead does. It flies a little bit straighter for a little bit longer. There's a misconception that they have oblong pellets, and they do. Some of their pellets are not round. And you can overcome that by choke tube combinations, and sometimes it comes out better. For instance, on my gun, I've done a lot of testing with choke tubes on my Benelli. I currently use 2 choke tubes. The only tubes I Coyote hunt with. I have a Carlson's extended full, approved for steel shot, and I have a Primo's, I believe they call it a Power Dog ported extended choke, designed for heavy shot. Heavy shot has some new choke tubes out. I haven't tested those yet. But in the Primo's choke, the heavy shot performs very good. I can maintain 80% of my pellets on a 24-inch square out to about 60 yards. And number 4 buck through that same choke, I get about 80% of the pellets somewhere in the range of 45 to 50 yards. So, and again, depending on how you know your gun behaves, you can push that range a little bit. I went on a hunt a few years ago in a non-lead area in California, in a shotgun-only area in California, and at night we were out there in the middle of a sort of a little depression leading to a wash. It wasn't quite the wash yet, but it was sort of a wash finger, if you want to call it that. And we're out there lighting at night. Here comes in this coyote. I thought it was about 60 yards. Pulled the trigger, no problem. It was a heavy shot, dropped it right there. It actually turned out it was 98 yards. And I wouldn't recommend that on a consistent basis. If I had been in the daytime, which is about 90% of the coyotes I do shotgun are in the daytime, I would have waited for that animal to come in. He hung up, I pulled the trigger. And it worked out very well for me, but I never would have made that shot if I didn't pattern my gun first and know where it was hitting. I was a good 16 inches over, holdover, even thinking that it was 60 yards. And let's talk about holdover for a minute. It's totally different than clay shooting when you're talking about coyotes. You know, when you're shooting clays, most people like to drag in behind the bird, track it with the bead, and then pull through it when you pull the trigger. You can do the same thing with a Coyote, but you always want to shoot a little low typically. And the reason being is that most people, I don't know if it's an adrenaline factor or you think you're trying to hurry, they tend to punch the trigger, which pushes your shot up. And I found I do the same thing also. So we'll imagine that the circle is our Coyote. My aiming point is not typically the center. It's typically about 2/3. And that way, if I mess up and punch it and shoot high, it's still within my shot column. You know, leads and things, you can still experience those about the same as a clay bird. You want to lead your target appropriately, and it'll vary at different speeds and different distances, but that's more you getting in knowledge with your gun and your equipment. There's no magical gun. There are guns that have better features or the other, but that's really a personal preference. I hunt with a Benelli because I like Benelli. I want to shoot semi-auto. Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with hunting with an 870 or a Mossberg. If you know that gun and you know where it shoots with any given ammo, you will kill coyotes effectively just as anybody else. Doesn't matter if it's a $200 gun or a $1,000 gun. And so really that's the most important part, is getting to know your equipment. You're going to have to, especially if you hunt with multiple loads, you're going to have to play with that a little bit with different choke combinations. Talk about chokes for a minute. The extended choke is your best friend in the world of hunting, really in the world of shotguns. And the reason being that you will get much more consistent patterns out of it. Now we can talk about ported chokes and things like that, and there's some gimmicky things on the market, but it all comes down to basic physics that the longer forcing cone you have that you're trying to constrict that pattern to, the less jarring or the more stable that load's going to be. If you have a typical choke tube, it's about 2.5 inches long and 3 inches long. Most extended chokes are about 5 inches long. So in a typical choke tube, you're trying to condense that shot down in 3 inches. Extended choke, you have 5 inches. So the longer it takes to get there, it's more of sort of an even ramp, if you will. And it really helps on pattern consistency. The buckshots, depending on your gun choke combination, and it's really not necessarily the gun, it's more barrel length and velocity and choke combination is what it comes down to, 24 inch versus 28 inch, for example, will behave differently. So you need to know how that is. Some combinations like to be constricted tight. For instance, my Primos choke, if you put it on a scale, is really probably a double extra full, almost a turkey choke. And it works very well with the heavy shot. It works very well with the buckshot. The Carlson's choke I run works a little bit better with the buckshot. So I tend to run the Carlson's choke if I'm going to be in an area that allows lead. Like I said, I use the Winchester Super Magnum load exclusively now. It took me probably going through every shot shell on the market before I settled on that. And you really have to play with it and put in a little bit of money at the range to get familiar with that. You know, a lot of guys go, well, you know, you look at heavy shot. It's $40 a box for 10 shots. It's pretty expensive. And you go to the range, that eats up your pocketbook pretty quick. But if you look at that on the other end of the spectrum, and you look at how many times do I go hunting? And do I want to give up that lead-free area, which I know where all these coyotes are, because I don't want to use their lead-free ammo? Well, in my case, the answer was no. So I spent $80 at the range. I went through 2 boxes of shot shells, and I played with the chokes until I found a combination that worked really well, and I stick with it. And it's the same thing with anything else. Practice does make perfect in this case. Most ranges I found will not let you practice your shooting positions per se. You know, like I said earlier, I tend to I have my gun at my side most of the time, and that's for obvious reasons. You know, ranges have range rules because they want to make sure you go home safely and interaction with other shooters. If you're out there in the middle of the desert, you can practice these things safely when you know that you have a background that's appropriate for it and you know how to handle your weapons. That's really the key. Is, you know, everybody wants to go home safe. The porting on a choke tube, some guys buy into it, some guys don't. I've done a little bit of testing on it. It does give you a little bit better patterns. Porting on a choke tube isn't like porting on a rifle in the fact that it reduces recoil. There's a lot of claims out there that it does. I don't necessarily agree with them.
What's porting?
Porting would be either holes or slots drilled into the choke tube. You'll find them only on extended chokes. I don't know if anybody's making a ported flush choke. That doesn't make much sense to me. What it really does in the case of the tighter chokes, remember that your wad is contained by a polymer, or your shot is contained by a polymer wad. Plastic's a lot softer than steel, and actually when you're cleaning your bow, you'll find the strings of the wad coming out. So the ported choke tube actually tends to grab the wad a little bit. It's an uneven surface, if you will, even if they're completely flush, gives it a place for the wad to expand out into. And it tends to separate the shot column from the wad before it leaves the barrel. Some guns it improves the pattern consistency, some guns don't. Can I say that they don't separate the wad? No, I think they all do separate the wad. But again, it's very individualistic, excuse me, for the gun choke tube combination according to how good your shot column is going to be on the target. So that's certainly, you can play around with those. Don't necessarily go out and buy 11 choke tubes like I did. I now have 9 useless choke tubes that I never use. So anybody has a Benelli and would like to borrow 9 useless choke tubes to, maybe they're useful for you, let me know. I don't know, but there are great things now that we have, you know, all these different websites on the internet they're selling all over the place. Read the reviews on them. Chances are there's some guy out there who's bought this thing, who's using the same ammo that you are, with a similar gun that you are, and you can narrow that down really a lot. I mean, it's, I like spending my money most of the time on hunting versus stuff that I don't use, so that's really key for me. Now let's talk about, real quick, about guns being blue, camo, or matte. If you're rifle hunting, you can usually get away with a gloss blue gun. I won't say always, because there are certain circumstances, but I will say usually. Just know that your gun is like a mirror. And gloss blue is actually probably more reflective than this in sunlight because of the way that it glares off of it. It's, I mean, it glares like crazy. You can see a guy, I don't know if anybody of you ever been in the situation, you know, you're deer hunting on public land and there's 15 other guys out there. You always know who's got the gloss blue rifle because it looks like he's carrying a mirror going out there all the time. Well, to a coyote, much more important than it is to a deer. Coyotes, by nature, are very cautious. They have a very strong fight-or-flight instinct, and anything that you get them outside of their comfort zone decreases your chances of having a successful outing. So if you have a gloss blue shotgun, doesn't mean you can't use it. Do something to take away that glare. There's 8 billion products out there. You can, if you want to go crazy and paint it, you can paint it. You can cover it in a gun sock. You can cover it in tape. Do something to knock down the glare. It gets a little bit better when you get into matte guns. Matte guns, if they're an all-black composite, are non-reflective. The problem is you now have a large, all-black contrasting object. And if you have it at your side or you're sitting down and you have it across your lap and you don't move it, probably not going to hurt you that much. But if you're like 99% of the hunters out there, at some point you're going to shift a little bit. You know, you're standing on stand for anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes on average, and you want to be comfortable, and you're in a chair and you're going to move a little bit. If the animal is looking directly at you and you move your shotgun in front of you like this, that's like saying go away. That's a big, huge movement to that animal. So camo does have its place. Like I say, it's a tool to help you be more successful. Doesn't mean that you won't be successful without it, but it is a tool to help you be more successful. So the same thing applies to the guns. All my guns when I hunt are either permanently camoed, have some sort of finish on them, or a lot of times I use this, used to go into the product named Flex Wrap. I don't know what it's called now. It's sort of a self-sticky tape, sticks to itself, and it's not gummy.
Coban wrap.
Okay, now they make that in camo colors. Don't necessarily need camo. I found actually if you have an all black gun, just breaking it up with a different color, either a gray or some sort of earth tone, works pretty good if you use a banded pattern. Really, you just want to break up the outline, and you know, that's certainly a tool that you can use. Well, we'll touch on the real important parts. Okay, so let's talk about stand selection and what I call scent cone. So using this diagram again, we'll talk about single hunter and multiple hunters. So let's say that the wind is blowing this way, and the X is our single hunter. Well, our scent is going to carry off in a cone shape, like this. So that's your scent cone. You're effectively blowing your scent this way. So what you need to know about that is if a coyote is behind you and it comes in here and it catches your scent, he's going to turn around and leave. Most likely he's not going to go this way. He's usually going to go the opposite way which he came. Now if you're hunting with two hunters, you can use this to your advantage. So what you do with two hunters is this hunter here, we'll put him looking this way. Okay? He can see the edge of his scent cone. He can see the edge of the call, and upwind is here. The second hunter, where do you guys think the second hunter should be? Closer or farther away from that first hunter?
Right next to him.
Exactly. You put the second hunter, if at all possible, on the other side of the bush that that hunter is standing in front of him. And he watches this way. He can now still see the call out of the corner of his eye. His scent cone is overlapping first hunter's scent cone. You have a much smaller scent signature. This hunter can pick up the shot that is scared away by the first hunter's scent cone. So, going off of that really quick, let's talk about why 2 to 3 hunters is ideal and any more than 3 is really detrimental. So, you know, you put 3 guys in a bush for 15 minutes, they're going to make some noise. You could try to be as quiet as you want to be, but they're going to make some noise. So ideally, if you have 2 hunters, that's your best case scenario. If you have 3 hunters, you want to put the third hunter somewhere on the same alignment with these hunters on axis. But you want to change his scent cone a little bit to give him a fair shot too. So if you put the third hunter here, the wind's still blowing the same way, his scent cone goes this way. First hunter has this whole area, he's going to get a shot. He's downwind. Second hunter can also pick up anything that comes in on this side, also downwind. Third hunter gets a scent cone shot. So it's an equal fair opportunity, if you will, for everybody. You never want to single out anybody, especially when you're trying to teach them something, put them in a bad shooting position where they can't make it happen. It's one of the most frustrating things in the world to have everything happen right, and you're trying to teach somebody new and get them interested in this sport, and then absolutely have it so they can't make a shot. Be it either that there's another hunter in the way, or that coyote is now set up to run right through your scent to where the shot's almost impossible. So, talking about that again, and we'll run into tournament hunting real quick with that. When I hunt in tournaments, club hunts, state hunts, I usually try to keep it myself and 1 other hunter. 3 is not so bad, like I showed you here. Any more than 3 really takes you out of the competition. Casual hunting is a whole other story. You're trying to teach a bunch of new guys, you can go out and set up multiple stands. You might have these guys half-mile apart from the other guys. 2 totally different scenarios. But if you take 10 guys and stick them in the same half-mile radius, you're really kind of knocking down everybody's chances of being successful. So along the lines of tournament hunting, we talked about that. Like I say, 2 is ideal, 3 is doable. Any more than 3 is really detrimental. Talk about sun position real quick. It's the same thing your dad, your grandpa always told you. Sun at your back. Works the best, if you can make it happen. Go into a situation trying to do that, but don't let yourself be forced out of a good potential stand because you can't do that. Let's touch real quick, since I'm running out of time, on what to do after the shot. So you've got a coyote that's come in. You made a good shot on this coyote, or a bad shot. You shot. Hopefully you got the coyote. Doesn't matter if you did or really didn't. If that coyote comes in and you've been calling for 13, 14 minutes, you're on a tournament hunt, or you're on a casual hunt. Usually, if that's the only coyote I've seen on that stand ends. There's really not much of a point in going beyond that. I find that anywhere from 13 to 15 minutes is about the max time, and really the best average time, if you want to say, is probably about 6 minutes. If a coyote is within that area in about 6 minutes, unless it's a very reluctant coyote, you will see a glimpse of it. So keep that in mind. You shot this coyote. Now what do? Well, if you're using an electronic caller and you've got a coyote call or a pup yip call, put that call on immediately. Let it run for 30, 40 seconds before you shut it off. A lot of times you'll pick up an extra coyote. Now, that won't necessarily come in right then. A lot of people think they do, and a lot of people get hung up on these shows that we watch out of the Midwest, and these guys are sitting on a farm field and they pop a coyote and one's coming right in. That's not California hunting. That doesn't happen out here very rarely. It's just the nature of the beast that we have to deal with. So what you want to do is you want to treat that coyote like it never happened. If it's early in the stand and it came in at 2 minutes, you start a clock over. you get to go now 17 minutes on your call instead of 15 minutes. A lot of times you'll find that you pick up a different animal. Because like I said in the beginning, every single scenario should be treated like a multiple scenario. Coyotes are a pack animal. Most of the time, especially early in the season, when you're getting a lot of younger animals out there roaming around, they are roaming in packs, but only one animal will come in. And that's really one of the biggest things you can do to pick up your success, is to concentrate on practicing what you can do after the shot. Be fluid with your movements. You shoot the coyote, it's down over here. Don't get really excited to run up over it. Unless that coyote is getting up and running away, there is no reason to go after it, pick it up right then to shoot it. It's dead. It's not going anywhere. So sit there and be fluid with your movements. Go back into your stand mode. Go back into your not moving, very quiet, very reserved mode. And quite often you'll pick up a second coyote on that stand if you're in a good area. Well, thanks for listening to me tonight, and hope you guys learned a little bit about shotgun hunting. Something maybe help you improve your chances in the future.